Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and this is my review for the recently released Crackdown 3. Crackdown 3 is the third entry to the Xbox exclusive third-person explosive sandbox series. It was initially announced back in 2014 as a way to showcase Microsoft's cloud computing-based destruction, and was then delayed multiple times as several internal roadblocks forced major shifts in the game's direction. But now it's finally here, and what we're left with isn't necessarily the high-end cloud-based destructive sandbox that we were promised. In fact, what we're left with is hardly on par with most AAA games. Though, despite its many shortcomings, there's still a fair bit of fun that can be had, space jumping around a neon environment and blasting enemies mindlessly with a Terry Crews character model. The question really comes down to how much you're willing to pay for what's ultimately a subpar experience. And to help you answer that question, let's break it all down by first looking at the story on offer. Crackdown 3 starts off very promisingly, with some high-quality motion capture cutscenes and a familiar and excitable Terry Crews pumping up his squad as they set out to liberate a city that succumbed to a hostile takeover. The group responsible for this takeover, Terra Nova, is an evil corporation that plans to control the world with high-end technology and bioweapons. They black out the entire world, and our heroes, also known as the Agency, track the disturbance back to New Providence, a small futuristic city on an island with several skyscrapers and neon signs. But this promise of an engaging story with Terry Crews is quite literally a marketing scheme to help sell the game. Terry Crews, while one of the many playable character models, has zero role in this experience. He shouts out maybe one or two lines during the gameplay, but never once reprises his actual role in the story. Instead, most of the narrative is delivered via voice comms from the agency leader voiced by Michael McConaughey, who also never shuts up throughout the entire experience. He constantly repeats the same needless tutorial lines explaining the simplest of gameplay mechanics, and occasionally comments on what you're doing. You can't even leave your controller sitting for more than 10 seconds without him trying to say something funny. The rest of the story is shown via still image cutscenes before and after dealing with the game's many bosses, a method that typically accompanies games with tight budgets. Crackdown 3's story is just not delivered well. They clearly picked up Terry Crews as a way to help sell the game, and tried to slap together a narrative to piece the gameplay experience together in the final hour, and it definitely shows. But the story has never really been Crackdown's strong suit. The real draw of a Crackdown game is its open world gameplay experience, and while it's not perfect, there's actually a bit of fun to be had in the world of New Providence. The game starts off with a less than promising tutorial segment that demonstrates some weak combat design and boring environments. But once you're let off the leash and allowed to explore at your own pace, the experience really begins to shine in a different light. Crackdown 3's open world is a sci-fi city filled with several different types of side missions to complete. These missions include blowing up oil pipelines, freeing allied militia, or disrupting Terra Nova security checkpoints. Completing enough of the same objective type will eventually draw an underboss out of hiding, allowing you to travel to their location and fight your way to them. Defeating enough of these underbosses will then unlock access to one of the three lieutenants, who control the larger skyscrapers in the center of the city. Reaching the top of these skyscrapers will trigger a boss fight with the lieutenants, and defeating all three lieutenants will grant you access to the final boss in the game. There's no specific story-based missions to play here, so you really are just given free reign of a hostile sandbox and tasked with completing a bunch of side missions. It's not really the most inventive open world design, and you can blow through the entire experience in roughly 6 hours. Though, if you want to get the most out of this experience, it's also worth investing time in upgrading your arsenal and your character. At the start of the game, you're given the option to choose from one of several different agents. This choice doesn't impact the story at all, but instead will give you a slight advantage to a few skill sets like agility or vehicle driving skills. Most of these agents are available from the start, but there are a few you can unlock by locating agent DNA around the world. I didn't personally find any need to swap between these agents throughout my playtime, but it does offer the small opportunity to customize who you want to play as. Throughout the game, you'll earn skill orbs for 5 different categories, and an increased focus in any one category will unlock access to more powerful abilities. The first category, Agility, determines your ability to maneuver around the environment. Every time you rank up the skill, you'll be able to move faster and jump further, a skill that's pretty much mandatory if you plan on scaling the large skyscrapers at the end of the game. You can also unlock new abilities like boosters that will help you double jump and dash around. The firearms skill set is increased by performing kills with any of the game's guns. There's a large selection of guns to choose from, which can be unlocked by fighting them off of dead enemies in the world. The shooting can feel really outdated though, considering it's following the same lock-on aim design that was used back in the older Crackdown games. You can either free fire from the hip, or hold the left trigger to lock on to the nearest target. Improving this skill will allow you to target specific body parts, but the automatic recoil and bullet spread made this frustrating to deal with. I generally found myself sticking to more explosive-based weapons in the later half of the game. The strength skill can improve your melee capabilities. The melee feels a bit awkward thanks to the sloppy animation that can't be followed up smoothly with additional attacks. But I did like the ground slam move and the ability to pick up heavy objects and throw them back at enemies. I also found that performing the ground slam from any height would allow my character to survive any fall, which is useful considering falls from certain heights can kill you. This isn't properly explained in the game, and so it's difficult to really determine whether a huge fall is safe or not. But exploiting the slam move did make it much easier to maneuver the world without having to worry about accidental suicides. The explosive skill is pretty self-explanatory. Kill enemies with explosions and you'll get more options for blowing things up. This might be the single most fun aspect of Crackdown 3. The explosive nature of the level environment and availability of explosive weaponry makes each encounter with enemies a test of how much you can fill your screen with awesome chaos. Several of the missions involve blowing up large tankers filled with various colorful gases and wreaking havoc on hostile reinforcements. While the environments certainly aren't as destructive as the original demonstration of Crackdown 3 would have implied, there's still plenty of specific explosive props that are impossible not to blow up as you rampage down the streets. And finally, there's the driving skill. Driving is probably one of Crackdown 3's weaker aspects. The weight and feel of the vehicles are just horrible. The last time I drove vehicles this loose and awkward was in a side mission in a Tony Hawk video game. Performing stunts with your vehicle like jumps and drifting will reward you with driving points, which can unlock upgrades for your personal agency vehicle. The agency vehicle can transform from a sort of Indy car into either a weird Mars rover type vehicle that's supposed to drive up walls, or a tank. But I rarely perform stunts because I wanted to. The vehicle seemed to do that all on their own, with their awkward handling and bad collision detection. There are some races around the world that can be used to help boost your driving points, but these only highlight the bad handling even more. There are some cool ideas here, like the ability to drive up the side of walls, but it feels poorly implemented, and completely useless considering you're safer on foot shooting back at enemies for most of the game. There are several different variations of these enemies that you'll face throughout your short time in New Providence, ranging from simple infantry, armored vehicles, drones, and powerful mechs. But for the most part, the game is pretty easy. I rarely found myself in situations where I was strained for resources, and I never felt like I was struggling to complete any particular mission. Even when you are stuck facing challenging odds, the game holds your hand, with McConaughey telling you what to do every 5 seconds, and respawns not resetting any enemies that you've killed. The only time I had the game reset my progress was after failing encounters with bosses, which were easily the more challenging sections of the game. However, the final boss was just pathetic, with only a single phase that almost took no effort at all. There's a lot of decent gameplay choices in Crackdown 3. Ranking up various abilities by performing related feats is a solid choice for progression, and the rewards were well worth the effort. I felt like my character was genuinely becoming more and more awesome, and I wanted to consistently improve my arsenal so that I had more opportunities to blow things up. But then there's other elements that hurt the gameplay experience, like a lack of focused story objectives, outdated shooting mechanics, and abysmal vehicle handling. Crackdown 3 also features its own multiplayer modes. You can play the entire campaign with up to 4 friends in co-op, which will add even more opportunity for insane citywide pyrotechnics. Or you can try and duke it out in an online competitive multiplayer experience known as Wrecking Zone. Wrecking Zone is where the dynamic cloud-based destruction wound up, and unfortunately it appears the team responsible for implementing this into the actual gameplay failed to deliver anything other than a simple tech demonstration. Wrecking Zone is one of the most uninspired and boring multiplayers I've played in a long time. First off, even after only a few weeks of this game coming out, it took several minutes just to find a half-full match of players to play with. Then, there's only a few game modes, each with just basic variations of standard team deathmatch. But instead of ranking up your character to earn new weapons, or even going old school and letting players run around the map and find weapons, you're able to select whatever weapon you'd like to use every time you respawn. This means you can gear up with a rocket launcher as your primary and just blast everything in sight. The automatic aiming system from the campaign is still at play here, so the combat experience essentially boils down to using whatever the best gun in the game is and making sure you hold the aim button and the fire button down before the enemy does. The only really cool aspect of this mode is the fully destructible environments, and this is definitely impressive. The multiplayer arenas are built up of these large dynamic structures that can be chipped away with any explosive impact. Watching structures fall apart as the battle rages on is cool, but it's ruined by an uninspired shooting experience. And finally, let's talk about the game's presentation. Crackdown 3 isn't really the prettiest game on the market. In fact, there's several points where the environments in this game just feel completely empty, with barely any vehicles on the roads and poorly detailed structures. But it's not all bad. The game's cel-shaded appearance helps make this lack of detail fit in with the artistic aesthetic. The clean, sci-fi utopian city feels like it's represented just well enough to be convincing, and the amount of color variety as you look out into the skyline is still nice to look at. Terry Crews, at least in the opening cinematics, looks incredible, and his character model isn't half bad either. Mix this super colorful sci-fi world in with a ton of gigantic, impressive explosive fireballs, and there's some decent eye candy to enjoy. But at the same time, the illusion is broken often by consistently broken AI and sloppy animation design. Almost every enemy that drove up and stepped out of their vehicle would just proceed to slide around the ground with no walking animation being triggered. I also noticed pedestrian AI smashing into each other on the road, or just randomly trying to make U-turns on the highway, resulting in massive explosions all on their own. For such a simple looking game, these type of mistakes are just inexcusable. Performance on the PC version of the game I tested was solid throughout most of my experience, though the Wrecking Zone mode was an unplayable stuttery mess every time that I tried it. Overall, Crackdown 3 is a tough game to recommend. It's clear here that Microsoft had a cool idea for cloud-based computing that would allow the Xbox One platform to be able to handle a CPU load way beyond its actual capabilities, but they failed to find a way to properly implement it into a fan-favorite franchise. And rather than just accepting the loss, they contracted Terry Crews to help market the game, had him record the bare minimum amount of dialogue for an intro cutscene, and then threw in some uninspired side missions into a far more limited open world. The quality here just isn't on par with what gamers have come to expect from a full-price AAA experience. This game feels insanely outdated, almost as if it's trying to compete with the likes of Vice City or Grand Theft Auto 3 in terms of its sandbox design. There's still some fun to be had jumping around this semi-destructive playground, earning upgrades and blowing up giant aircraft, but it's a game that you're better off waiting for a deep sale for. But what do you guys think? Are you interested in Crackdown 3? If not, what do you think they could have done to make it better? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.